Welcome everyone to Bethesda Gaming Saga. I'm Steve-O.
And I'm Eldon the Noble. Join us as we journey through some of gaming's most immersive and ambitious games ever made.
Guys, what is going on? It's been a big week of Starfield. Tons of information just today as we're recording this podcast right now. So today we're going to jump into that. We got a Q&A with a couple of the developers over at Bethesda, the timelines that they revealed on Twitter, tons of information, plus some various other things. But before we do get started on this broadcast, we got to bring special attention to our Patreon member, Falcor. Thank you so much, Falcor, for your donation to our pledge of our podcast, you could say, and for your support and your activity in the Discord. Your questions are phenomenal, sir.
So the first discussion we're going to have today, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to be looking at the Q&A. And like he said, today, the Q&A went live. And so we're going to be looking at that. So what happened was sometime back, the official BGS Discord was set up to where members could ask some questions, and some of those questions would be picked from Will Shin and Emil Pagliarulo, lead developers over at BGS. And they would answer them. So they chose 16 of those questions because there were hundreds that were asked. They chose 16 and they answered in a live chat in Discord their answers. And right now we're going to look at a few of the main takeaways from it. But in the extended episode, we're going to go through each question, each answer, and look at it. And it's going to be a really good time there. Looking forward to it. But anyway, the biggest thing for me personally, that when I got to the point, the biggest answer that I found fascinating and was kind of blown away with was the question. It was posed: what are the beliefs and basic history of the religions we can join, referring to the Sanctum Universum, the Enlightened, and the Great Serpent? And specifically, the answer for the Sanctum Universum fascinated me. And Emil said, the members, called the Universals, believe that God very much exists somewhere in the universe, that a higher power is guiding us all. Specifically, they believe that humanity's ability to travel the universe and grav jump is God's way of saying, I'm out here, come find me. Now, this was fascinating to me because a lot of games look at religions and the religious tone of things, and it's all either very cult crazy people right? Like we see in Fallout, which I mean, Fallout, that does make sense to see that being the tone of things, or the atheistic kind of tone, which we see that the other two religions is that way. But to see where it seemed like a monotheistic religion being portrayed in a very grounded, again, Starfield has a very grounded sense to it. To see it in that way was really refreshing and really fascinating. I'm very much looking forward to jumping into Starfield and checking them out and seeing what they're like. What do you think about that?
You said it perfectly, and I think Emil's answer was spot on. And I'm glad he gave us so information, excuse me, so much detailed information on what that religion means. And it kind
Mm-hmm.
of plays. I mean, it really plays in a way like I could say, let's say in the future we do develop a way to jump to other planets or universes, galaxies, for real, for humans. I could fully see this being how we take our religion now and even up in it because, hey, we all believe, or at least most people believe God and we were here on Earth, but what if we could expand to the stars? What if we could expand to other planets, other life forms, and that you're like, hey, not that God's not real, he's just out there. We're trying to find him. Like
Yeah.
it almost sounds like a real extension of our, religion today.
100%, and that's really refreshing and great to see.
Hmm.
Again, that they're not shying away from it like a lot of games do, or like you
Yep.
said, there is this tone that when humans achieve the ability for space travel and such, and I think, oh, what was the name of that show? That sci-fi show that was like the Star Trek type of show with
Oh, yeah, Battlestar Galactica.
No,
Uh,
it was with
is
the
it
dude from
newer?
Family Guy.
Orville.
Orville,
Orville.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And they talk about it there. It's been a while since I've watched it. Really funny show.
Hmm.
The Orville talked about it that basically when humans or when any creature achieve the technological level of space travel, they become atheistic. They leave all that because that's primitive
Hmm.
ways of thought. That is
Yep.
kind of how sci-fi handles that, or either very cult-like. And so it's
Hmm.
refreshing to see a very different take on that. A
I
very
agree. I
different
mean,
take.
the fact that they even put in there that, hey, we're saying God's still out there, come find me. Like, I was blown away by the answers. Like, they actually, the fact that the video game actually said God,
Right.
and like on a normal term as we see today, religion, I was
Hmm.
just like you, I was blown away. I was like, what a cool aspect. And even cooler, and kind of adding on to that, is how will interactions be with, let's say, the great serpent, the
Hmm.
fuss throat, I can't think of that name now, but how would the other religions react? Like if you're part of the universal sancta, I've already forgot the name.
Sanctum
uh,
Universum.
yeah,
It is
sancta
a bit of an
universum.
odd name.
Yeah, but how will, like, if you come across the enlightened or the great serpent, like what are the interactions going to be like? I think that'll be fun to see too.
100%. 100%.
Hmm.
Another question that jumped out to me in the answers was the history of the mechs. It was the very last question. And the answer was gave lore reason as to why, even though we saw in the anime thing, why we won't be able to pilot the mechs. Because after the colony war ended, both of those, uh, referring to the mechs, were outlawed with the armistice that ended the colony war.
Hmm.
That those mechs were in ruins, but even if they weren't in ruins, they were outlawed. So there's lore reasons as to why we won't have mechs. Now we still don't have lore reasons why we have no ground vehicles.
Hmm.
Like, there's lore reasons in Fallout why there's no ground vehicles for the most
Yeah.
part. Now I don't know if they'll ever be able to give a good reason as to why no land vehicles, again, lore wise. But it's good to see that, oh, there's mechs, but we don't
Hmm.
have vehicles like mechs. So why can't we have mechs? Well, now we know why, and I thought that was pretty interesting.
Oh, absolutely. I think I kind of got a hint of that when they did the anime short, like how the girl was looking back in time and how her parents were killed and the mech
Hmm.
runes. I had a feeling it
Right.
had to do something like this was too deadly, we couldn't use it, but the reason it gave was perfect and
Hmm.
explains that. But again, to your credit, why don't we have like a speeder like in Star Wars?
Right.
Why don't we have this? And
Rover.
you know
And
what?
they
Maybe I was gonna say maybe they may answer that at some point in the game because his question was pretty specific, like why,
right.
what's the history of the mechs? If he just said what is the history of the mechs? Why no ground vehicles? In the same question,
Hmm.
maybe it would have went a different way.
Right. Now, again, from a technologically speaking and game dev speaking, I understand why we have no ground
Hmm.
vehicles, but I want a
Hmm.
lore explanation, right?
Yep. Yep. I
So the
agree.
last question and the last answer to that I think really jumps out to me was actually the first question. Can we buy houses or properties in main city? Now, what I want to look at specifically was the verbiage used: housage or property. There's that
Hmm.
or property. And Will says, yes, there's housing in different cities players can get. And Emil says you can purchase a dwelling in all the major cities. The reason I bring that up is one of the traits that we've looked at before describes how you can kind of own a business.
Hmm.
And with verbiage like that, makes me look at it as though we will not be able to purchase traditional like brick and mortar store with the storefront to sell stuff out of or anything, because they make a specific purpose. Because you got to understand, these questions was not just asked and they were answering them on the fly.
Yeah.
All of these answers are premeditated. They
Hmm.
perfect purposely chose houses and dwellings,
Hmm.
not property as the question asked. So I find that pretty interesting as a way to confirm, again, my suspicions about what that trait really deals with,
Hmm.
which is basically accessing maybe to being able to trade more things when you sell to vendors, but more so affects the prices you get. That's kind of my thought, and I
Yep.
believe that supports it.
And I think following up on that too, I think in my mind, even the way they answer it, I feel like it could be like Skyrim, but more advanced. And what I mean by that is there's a background where you can own a property right out of the gate. That's a 50,000
Mhm.
credit mortgage. I
Right.
forget the name of the background, and then you have to pay that weekly, and it's in this somewhere. It's a nice house, but maybe you can purchase multiple houses like they said, and one you get for a reward, but the outposts, say, or businesses are only made through outposts like that, where you are really generating money or resources only to, progress yourself through the game. Not like, it would be awesome to have a brick and mortar store. Like, let's say you develop, a new, even food, like for chef, and you're
Mhm.
like, you want to sell that and like a sushi
Yeah.
restaurant, that would be cool. But I get why they wouldn't do that, but still,
Right.
it would be awesome to see. Just my little
Well,
two
now that you
cents.
say that, what would be really cool to see is that in your outpost, because we have seen where when you're in your outpost, a ship
Mhm.
taking off and landing.
Yes.
My understanding was that basically that was your connection to other outposts that
Mhm.
I can't think of what it's called, what that kind of system is. It
Like
was
a
in Fallout.
pipeline, kinda like
Pipeline,
that.
yeah, to the different settlements. But what if you could actually have multiple landing pads and have visitors, and you can have
Ooh,
shops set up in your
that
outpost
would be
that can have
cool.
visitors and stuff? Now, I think that's probably getting a little too
But
grandiose.
still, that would
I
be very neat.
still right, and I could see where you could have a traditional style business
Mhm,
without having, the ability to own property and brick and mortar
mhm.
stores. But anyway, yeah.
That
So
would be
what was
awesome.
any questions or answers that really jumped out to you from the Q&A?
Those 3 were really, really good ones. I really like that a lot. There was, what was the one here? I'm gonna lose my mind. You answered those really good. I did like about the jail system.
Right.
That one, how they pretty much said, "Hey, it's like Skyrim in a way. You can buy yourself, bribe, essentially, do your time, get out." But I'm curious with the way the galaxy is, and he didn't really touch on a whole bunch. He said, "Let's see, will there be a jail system if committed crimes? Yes, you can elect to go to jail or pay a fine if you're arrested, even resist arrest. Some and settled systems were like Skyrim. But what I kind of got or didn't get from that is, okay, is that only in like the major cities? Like, let's say you're out resource and scavenging, but mercenaries come down, but or not even say mercenaries, say it's a UC ship, and you just decide to blow these guys away. Are you going to be wanted
Yeah.
by the UC at that point? The next time you come into space,
I feel
UC
like
vessel.
yes, that's
Yeah,
how it
I
would
could see
be.
that too. I think, and I could see a ship like pulling up and getting on your comms, almost like Star Trek, like, "Hey,
Yeah.
Captain, you're wanted for murdering 4 of our men. What do you say?" And then you're either in a dogfight or you go on board and they take you to the closest settlement or
Yeah, I
city
got
and
you.
do your time.
Yeah.
But of course, that, like we said on the other questions, due time will tell. Maybe we're getting too deep into the questions and answers, but that's what's fun about these. That's what's fun about questions
Absolutely.
like that.
Absolutely.
But now, any other questions or you think right now, or and the reason
No.
being is I wanted to talk a little bit about the timeline.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm a lore guy, and those listening to this, Skyrim lore was one of those things where I took time to read every book. Some were a little like boring, and I got like, okay, I don't need to read that now. Like if it was about how to make better crafting or potions or the lore on magic, okay, I could go past that. But if it was like a story about the Tamriel even, or the older, I'm losing my train of thought, like the older way of Skyrim ways, like the Greybeards, like, oh, okay, let's read this. And a lot of times it didn't have anything really to do that helped me in the game, but just the lore was interesting. So if you guys had checked
Mhm.
this out, and of course we don't have images up yet, but on Twitter, it goes as this a story so far, and it breaks down all the way from 2050 to where humans land on or arrive on Mars, and it only takes them 50 years where they're living in space. Now I won't bore everybody here with the whole list. You can go check it out yourself. But there were some really cool points, like how quickly things progressed. And that was the first one to me, where we go to Mars and we're living in space within a 50-year period. I thought that was really cool and just really shows how technologically advanced we started, booming essentially. Now,
Mhm.
New Atlantis was found in 2160. I think we knew that from one of the previous videos. And the one thing I did want to bring up, and I didn't hear anyone talk about this, but it says Cheyenne, the western cities, sounded by Solomon Coe, who founded it. Now, maybe they didn't talk about this because it seems obvious, but the fact you get a companion, Sam Coe,
Yeah, it's
from the
his
same city.
descendant.
Yeah, got to be a direct descendant. But I
Mhm.
wonder to what extent, like when you find him, is he like the leader of that city? Is he a higher up that just decides to. Because how many times we see that in video games where it's like the leader of a faction, like, hey, okay, I like what you're doing. I'm going to go with you. You
Right.
manage the whole city. I'm going with this guy. And before
Yeah.
you know, you got him manning outpost. He's like the
Yeah,
leader of the
but he
city.
in reality he's supposed to be leading a whole city. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
I thought that was cool, and I didn't hear a lot of people talk about it, but um, there was another one here. I'm jumping around, but I'm trying to find the real good ones. And it was about the war between the UC and I should have had it up here, but I feel like I love to read all these, but I'm definitely not going to bore everybody with them. But they talk about this is one thing that I thought was interesting. So Sarah Morgan in 2319 becomes the youngest head of the UC Navigator Corps, though its short-lived position as the division is shut down by 2030, or excuse me, 2320. Cast adrift, but still eager to put her training to good use, Morgan joins Constellation. Now, what I got out of that was not that she joined Constellation, but did the UC just give up exploring for space when they shut down the Navigator Corps? I wonder if
Hmm.
that's something like by that point, okay, hey, we found what we want to find. We're good.
Right.
And so she goes and joins Constellation. And then only another, excuse me, where was it at? I got to go forward here. That was 2319. By 2325, Sarah Morgan becomes acting chair of Constellation. So I would say, and when we view her, when we see her in the game, it looks like she's in her 30s, maybe 30s or
Yeah,
40s.
I'd probably
Um,
say at latest. I really if she's in her 40s, she's a very young looking 40s.
Right, right. I would guess 30s, and only basing on the timeline. I said 20s initially in my mind, but after seeing how she was the youngest person to run that thing, and then at only so many years later joining or chair of Constellation, she must be in her 30s. But
Right.
I thought that was interesting. Something else I want to see, they bring the light, like, okay, in 2325, theologian Matteo Katri joins Constellation. We don't. I know we're going to find out more about these companions, but some of them, like him, and I forget the other girl's name, like they almost feel like filler companions. Like
Mhm.
with Constellation, I feel like Sarah Morgan's the head honcho that we'll get the most out of. But I wonder why they bring it on the timeline. Like I feel like maybe Matteo's more important than we think.
Well, it's
Um,
interesting that you mentioned that with what we talked about in the Q&A. Mateo, that's his name, right? I don't have it in front
yeah,
of me.
yeah, Matteo.
Mateo, do we know what religion he's a part of?
I
Because
don't
it
think so.
sounds like he would be a part of the Sanctum Universum, and
Hmm.
that what the Sanctum Universum is being a part of the main story, because they talk about, the point of Starfield is asking the big questions, and seeing that Sanctum Universum is the kind of religion as it is, I could
Hmm.
see them very much spending time to explore the concept of deity like that.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
I find that really exciting, actually, because again, that's very unique. You don't see that explored in that
Hmm.
capacity. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sideline you,
No,
but talking
no,
about
no, that's
him, it
perfect.
made me, kind of wonder that.
No, that's a great point, especially how they call him a theologian.
Right,
You know,
exactly.
I just know
Exactly.
I didn't even put two and two together when I read that myself. So that's a great point. Um,
Yeah.
and they talk about Walter Stroud joining, where he's the co-owner and he's the financier backer essentially. But the timeline really just goes about people joining that we're going to come across in the game. Talks about the Freestar Ranger, Sam Coe, and his daughter when they join Constellation, and Andrea joining. And for some reason, my thing cut off here. I don't have another thing, but there's at some point where after the treaty between the UC and I think it's I forget who they were, the Freestar Collective might be. They're at war, and I think that's where it goes back to the mechs where they were fighting, and then the peace treaty comes, and then there's
Right.
peace for a long time, but then it starts back up, and I can't remember now, and I feel bad because we're talking to people interested in this, but I can't remember if the war starts back up why we're starting the game or right before we start the game and it ends again. I can't remember for
I
some
think
reason.
it
It's
ends again. I think we're at a
I think you're
state of,
right.
how do they put it? Tentative peace?
Yeah.
No, it was something very like it. Like, we're at peace, but
Yep.
it's
Well, I can't find it now, but I remember they said like the Freestar Collective made a settlement on a new planet, and the
Mhm.
UC got upset because
Right.
it was outside, and that started the war back up again. I thought,
That
but I.
started the actual colony war.
Oh, okay, okay,
That was the
okay.
spark of the actual colony war.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. I hate
Yeah,
that this
because
Twitter threads only got part
it
of it.
kind of reminds me that it's peace, but a very tension filled peace,
Mhm.
like kind of like the Cold War, like something could go off at any
Yep.
moment, and it just things erupt.
Yep. Oh, okay. Here,
Yeah.
that's okay. I got the timeline up now, but yeah. So then eventually the last bit of the timeline, just all the people joining Barrett, convinces Constellation to purchase a star station 868 and modify it to be a deep space scanner. Now that's the one everybody sees in the
Hmm.
trailer. It looks like a
Right.
star kind of thing. I
Hmm.
always picture it looks like the the thing from the Mummy that she opened the Book of the Dead with. That's what I
I
think it
gotcha.
looks like. But and they call that the eye. And then so I think at some point I can't remember if it was Barrett. I think Barrett or Sarah, one of them, have found a piece of this thing we're looking for. This thing to advance us, in space. And then of course 2330 is when Starfield begins, at least for us
Right.
in the game. So
Yeah.
that's really in a nutshell. And I hope everybody listening to this, you go and check it out. It's on Bethesda.net, Starfield's site. Just scroll down. But it's very interesting if you're into lore like me. And I don't know how books will play a factor or data pads, whatever they might have in Starfield, but th- there's and I'll get to this in the after show, either the after show this week or even next week. But I'll talk about some things I wanted to bring up. But I am very curious to see how the lore will go in the game. Like, are we just going to keep picking up data pads and books and it'll have something, or is it going to be, maybe like a holographic guy you walk up to? He's like, "Here's the history
Hmm.
of this." I don't
Right.
think we'll get that lucky, but
No. Yeah.
yeah, that's
So
that's that's it.
for me, what my biggest takeaways of the timeline is because I like lore,
Hmm.
right? But I have to be super invested and already immersed into the experience.
That
And
makes
with
sense.
Starfield, I'm not yet. Like it took me a while of playing Fallout before I really got into the okay, let me look into what this overarching like plot was that led to the the bombs dropping and all of that. It took me a
Hmm.
while because it just, it takes me a while. Now I read it and understood it and I find it interesting, but at the same time, I don't know. It doesn't grab me like it grabs some people. And even in Fallout 4, or yeah, Fallout 4 mainly, but in the Fallout games, I still don't stop and read the terminals and read the lore. I just,
Right. Right.
I don't know because at the same time, I'm like, I'm ready to game. I don't want to sit and do a bunch of reading.
Yep.
But
Yep.
for me, what
Exactly.
jumped out to me in the timeline is that by 2050 we'll be living. I'm sorry, we'll be first man on Mars, and by 2100 people living in space. And honestly, that sounds very, very realistic with where our technology is and is
Hmm.
headed. I could see. I don't remember. I knew at one time how long it would take in our current technology to get someone to Mars. But
Hmm.
thinking about the first man being on Mars by 2050 is very, very reasonable. I could see it actually being before then.
Oh yeah.
And with SpaceX and other companies and what's going on with putting stuff in space, to think about people living in space by
Hmm.
2100 is 100% believable
That's
because
true.
we've had people on the International Space Station that you could almost make the argument that they're kind of short-term living up there.
Hmm.
So I find that fascinating because I love how grounded this is shaping up to be in the experience. So
Yeah.
yeah, that
So
was my
that was
takeaways from the
the
timeline.
questions and answers that they asked the questions and answer today, which I'm sure by the time you were hearing this podcast, you probably heard about a lot of this stuff. But it's very interesting. We got some very good, interesting new information, interesting new light shed on that.
Hmm.
But now we're going to move on to our community question asked of us by Falcor in the Discord. And his question is a very, very great question. And to me, there is a three-part answer in which I'm going to divide it. I don't know about you, Steve-O, but I'm going to divide it. But the question is, how do you think Starfield's reception will be? What are your review predictions from critics like IGN, ACG, etc.? So, would you like to give your answer
Sure,
first?
I can. So
It's a great one. I'll try to sum up the best I can think, but in Falcor, I really mean it. Great question. Your questions each week on Patreon are phenomenal. But looking at this, I it's hit or miss because in the past I almost always relied on an IGN review if I hadn't played a game. It was a game I was thinking about getting because I felt like IGN almost was like, hey, they like the same stuff I like. of late, the last year or so, I've kind of not seen eye to eye with him, and and that's fine because it's
Hmm.
opinions. But I also feel like I don't know how some of these things rate. Like for instance, Baldur's Gate. I haven't played it yet. To my knowledge,
Hmm.
it seems like it's that one that came out of left field. People thought it'd be a decent game, but it's like blowing people out of the water. Phenomenal role
Yep.
playing,
100%.
great. I mean, Metacritic on one thing I think gave it the highest it's getting in like 10 years was like a 97 out of 100. Not Metacritic. I
Yeah.
can't remember who it was. Now, PC Gamer might have been PC Gamer, but um, I I've heard about review bombings already for Starfield, and
Yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
know with
I've been hearing
right,
about
and I
that.
know with movies, you see that like with Rotten Tomatoes, people get on there and review bomb, and if you're a guy on the fence, or maybe like we talked about last week, the marketing hasn't been stellar for Starfield,
Hmm.
you're coming in, oh man, that looks like a cool game. Oh wait, uh, Metacritic says it's like a, 70 out of 100 or whatever. You're going
And
to
it's a $70 game, so I
right.
don't know if I want to roll
Right,
those
exactly,
dice.
and to the second part of that, whether review bombing plays a factor or if it's solely from people, like, on the team, the critics that played it, I feel like the hype, though, that we know about and people looking forward to the game, in my mind, I feel like if the reception, like, let's say IGN gives it an 8 out of 10. Any other game, you look at that and say, "Hey, all right, 8 out of 10, something worth trying." I feel like the hype and the anticipation for this game, that if it's 8 or lower, like, it's a failure. And I hate to sound negative
Hmm.
like that. I just feel like if this game's not a 9, 9.5, or a 10 out of 10, and I just use IGN as a baseline there, I just feel like it's going to really take hit, like a snowball effect on fans.
Well, honestly, I agree with you that, and I agree with you because every other BGS game, we looked at it the other week.
Mhm,
Oblivion, Morrowind, Oblivion, Fallout 3, Skyrim, Fallout 4, all of those games, not including 76, because it was a completely different
mhm,
type of game, right? But single player experiences that Bethesda has worked on since Morrowind, every one of them, other than like one or two, was in the 90s. And the ones that were in the 80s or 8 point whatever it was, I don't remember the scale, if it
mhm.
was out of 10 or out of 100, were in the high eights. So if this was, say, in the lower eights slash 80s or lower, honestly, critically, review wise, that would be a failure. That would be short of Bethesda's usual standards,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
If you look at what all their other games review as, and it reviews say as a 7.8, 8.2, that would be the lowest BGS game reviewed
Yep.
ever. Now that's kind of what I think. But it's so IGN has recently been getting into some hot water because there seem to be very anti Xbox
Mhm.
slash BGS.
Yep.
And then there's a YouTube channel I'm a huge fan of, have been for many years, Game Ranks,
Mhm.
that I watch a lot of the content. They make good lists and stuff. They've been kind of in the same tone where like they made worst offender recently was like top 10 best exploration games for 2023, and they talk about games that have already come out and games that will come out where that puts a lot of emphasis on exploration,
Mhm.
right? And they say what they say about games that already come out, but every single one of the games about yet to come out, they talk about it in a tone of looking forward to it. This is going to be good, right?
Mhm.
Then they get to Starfield, which was the last one they covered, and oh, we don't know, guys. It looks kind of. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, 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 wait. I'm not expecting you to be singing praises. I don't even expect you to be as hype as I
Yep.
am. But I expect you to hold it at the same level you hold every other game. But you're going in instantly
Yep.
saying, and I wonder if it's because of how much goodwill that BGS has lost from 76, that it's not the mainstream popular opinion to be, oh, BGS,
Yep.
but to be like, and so they go in that because if you watch a lot of the videos, they either don't mention a BGS game where they should. For instance, this was a video I watched, I think earlier today, best single player games you could sink 100 hours into, right?
Mhm.
I'm not a big Skyrim person, but Skyrim's the obvious one. They don't mention Skyrim in that capacity. They mention it as a honorable mention, and they mention it there, and they say their reasoning was because we talk about it to death. But do you know what game was in the top 10?
No.
The Witcher 3.
Yeah.
Th- That game's been talked to death,
Yeah,
which is fine. It's
absolutely.
good. It should be.
It
But
sounds like
it's
they're
kind
being
of weird that
biased.
you
You know.
100%,
Yeah.
right? 100%. But I don't know. Maybe their audience just doesn't care about BGS games because they make it seem like the content they make and the games that they cover is based on the feedback and the
Mhm.
comments. So maybe they just get a lot of their stuff not wanting coverage from BGS, but their tone is very
Well,
aggravating
I
to
was
see.
going to add on to that, and I think you nailed it perfectly. With the last thing being Fallout 76 BGS made, I almost feel like because nobody's played this game, it's not like a normal game where you have early review embargoes coming out where guys can play. I think the review embargoes go out this week. I think to like certain
Yes,
people,
right. It
but
looks like it.
up until
Yeah.
this point, like that company or game rank, you said, if I think they're afraid if they say, guys, this game looks great, and then it turns out to be a failure, that hurts their brand. Or, so
Right.
they're on this fence, like, oh, I don't know, I guess we'll just have to see when it comes out. Because, and then when it does come out, they could be I hate to say it, but they could be the first ones. Let's say if it is bad, well, we tried to tell you guys this game wasn't going to be that. But at the same time, if it's a phenomenal, the game of the year, they can absolutely ride that horse and say, oh, we knew it all along, it's
Right.
going to be great. I just feel like that, and plus IGN, you hit it on the head. I heard about the Xbox, like they've been anti-Xbox for a while, and I just feel like Starfield, putting a lot of cards into that. Every review place or game place is afraid to say what they want to say in fear of like backlash.
Right. Now, again, I don't expect, I'm not an Xbox fanboy. I've never owned an Xbox in my
Hmm.
life, right? And I don't think Starfield in a lot of ways should be not on PlayStation. So none of this comes from being an Xbox fanboy. I mean, I am a PC gamer, so that's kind of where if I have to put allegiances,
Hmm.
that's where it kind of is. But for like looking at IGN, Game Ranks, their covering of games is a little bit more subjective,
Hmm.
right? Because they're all the time kind of talking about their opinions. But IGN feels like it should be a bit more objective, covering it as objective news, if you will. And to see that is very odd. But I haven't got to what I think my review predictions are going to be.
Yeah.
So I have three ways to categorize this. My personal review, what I think general audiences review, and critics. So my personal view, my prediction is that I'm going to flipping love it. I can already tell if it's half the game they promised and I'm able to play it, meaning it's nothing but crashes for the first 2 weeks.
Hmm.
It's like a SimCity 2013
Yeah.
launch. I don't know if you remember
Yeah.
that, but if it's like that, then that'll be disappointing, but I'll eventually move on past that to get into the game. But if it's half the game, unless there's something crazy wonky, if they just even remotely deliver on everything they've said, I'm going to love
Hmm.
it. It is going to be a game I spend more than 500 hours on.
Yep.
I'm just going to love it. My prediction for critics, honestly, I go back and forth. In some ways, I believe that it's going to toe the same kind of review BGS games always gets, right, which is the 90 to 94 or
Hmm.
9.0 to 9.4 type of thing, because I believe Fallout 4 and Skyrim got the same
I
9.4,
think so. Yeah.
9.5 review. And so I think it'll probably toe that. But then some part of me says, with the way a lot of these companies have already started to kind of, they're going to try to review it kind of negatively, right?
Hmm.
Ultimately, that won't affect my experience. I really don't care about that, other than for the fact of the tone and culture of the gaming as a whole, as a
Yeah.
community. I don't like seeing that. And the fact that people are already hating on Starfield before it comes out, like, or that is rooting for it to
Yeah.
fail,
That's what bothers
rooting
me.
for it to be bad. Why would you root for any game to be bad? A good example of that for me is, I don't know if you saw it, but I remember when Fast and Furious Crossroads was first unveiled. It was a Fast and Furious game from a few years ago that was kind of like its own spin-off thing. And I remember at the time I thought it looked terrible. I'm a huge Fast and Furious
Hmm.
fan, love cars, but I thought, I was like, the graphics, the everything, this looks terrible. Was I wanting it to be bad? Absolutely not. I want all games to be
Yep.
good. I want all games to be enjoyed by all players. But I still didn't think it would look good. But to actively hope for a game to be bad
Mhm.
is a weird take. But audiences, I think, uh public opinion changed after the 45-minute direct.
Mhm.
Before that, when it was just the 15, there was a lot of hate,
Yep.
and I knew that there was going to be a lot of public opinion that was going to already instantly hate
Yep.
it. Now, with that 45-minute direct, I think public opinion is swayed. I actually think public opinion, yes, you're going to have the people in those camps that says, "Nah, I'm not playing that. That looks like
Yep.
garbage." Or you have the people like me that's going to love it regardless. But I actually think, seeing a lot of people talk about Starfield since the direct, people are going into it with an open
Mhm.
mind. A large amount of people that aren't fans, like me and you, are super fans, or haters that going into that's going to hate it. They're not even going to play it. And if they
Yeah.
do, they're only going to play it so they can say why they hate it, which are like the two extremes. The bulk of it, I think people are going in with an open
Yep, I
mind.
agree. And I had a guy actually argue with me on my YouTube channel that he said he would rather than me hype up a game, he would rather I'm going to try to word this best I can, and I kid you not, I have it. It's in the comments, but he said he'd rather underhype a game hoping it would fail so that when it does good, it's like the phoenix rising from the ashes and and it'll get a lot better publicity. And I argued with this guy through comment. I said, I can't fathom where you think that's a good idea. I said, if a game is underplayed or people think it's bad and it turns out great, that's great. But I'm not going to not
Root for
root
that.
for that just so it can come out of the ashes and be great. And he was
Yes,
killing me.
there's one thing to be under promised and over
Yeah.
delivered, but it's another thing to actively try your game to be
Yeah.
hated on, and then to be like, "Ha! Turns out it is
Yeah.
good." Like that? What?
He also
No.
said, I'm going to come back on day two and when the game's released and when it's a failure. And I said, how are you going to say this after 2 days? I said, this is going to be
Yeah,
like
I
months and months before we figure out the severity.
right. Both critically
Yeah.
and monetarily, whether it was a failure or success. Yeah, I had somebody when I was making TikToks covering it. I had somebody that was basically like, "Well, I'm gonna come back and basically I'm gonna make you eat your
Hmm.
words." And I said, "Look, I'll be the if it turns out to be utter." I think we were talking about the buggy state of
Yeah.
launch. I think, or just the buggy state of the game in general. And I said, "Look, as much as bugs don't," I didn't say this, but in my mind I was like, as much as bugs don't really bother me, I'll be the I don't have a problem admitting, yeah, this
Yeah.
was a way buggier game than anticipated. I think we have evidence to
Yeah.
support that it won't be, and we'll go over that next week episode. But I'll be the first one to admit, hey, this is, yeah, really
As long
buggy,
as it's
really
not a
janky.
game crashing bug where I can't play it, I can handle like,
Or breaks the game where you can't go out a
yeah.
door,
Yeah.
or you can't complete a quest where it prevents you from breaking the game.
Yeah.
Like what Skyrim is still to this
Hmm.
day. If it's things like that,
Yeah.
that doesn't really
Nope.
affect me too much.
Absolutely. Now, if you guys would like to hear more of this podcast and get extra content that includes us discussing every single question from the Q&A, really looking forward to that, plus more discussion of the timeline, things we're excited about, then head on over to Patreon, unlock the extended show. You will not be disappointed, I promise. But
Yep.
guys, until next time, this has been Starfield Dad or Steve-O,
Yep, and Eldon the Noble for Bethesda Gaming Saga. May your adventures be filled with Nuka Cola.
and never end with an arrow to the knee.